So today, I want to express my deepest gratitude to the brave men and women who have served our nation with courage and dedication. On this Veterans Day, we honor your sacrifice and your commitment, and this day is yours for all of time. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for defending our freedom and protecting this kick-ass country of ours. This one is for you.
You're listening to The Stephen Torriello Show, building a platform of liberty for people in search of truth with a dash of hope and a life worth living. The Stephen Torriello Show. And now, here's Stephen.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the show. As always, thank you for tuning in. I wanted to go ahead and just pay a tribute to veterans, just do kind of like a quick little brief history of Veterans Day. And I dug in deep and found some insane audio from the Smithsonian archives. And it's audio of the final battle of World War I. It's wild audio from pure chaos until the moment the armistice goes into effect. And the armistice is essentially a ceasefire. The ceasefire was supposed to go into effect on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month. And at exactly 11 a.m., you can hear in the audio when the guns fell silent. And that is the moment the ceasefire went into effect. It is wild. And it's actually quite interesting how they got a hold of it, and I want to go into that also. But before I play the audio, I want to give a brief history of Veterans Day. So Veterans Day originated as Armistice Day on November 11th, 1919. marking the first anniversary of the end of World War I. In 1954, it evolved into what we know it as Veterans Day, and it's for honoring all U.S. military veterans. The day pays tribute to the bravery and sacrifice of those who served in the armed forces. So believe it or not, a lot of people get Memorial Day and Veterans Day confused, mixed up. So on Memorial Day, they're going out and they're shaking veterans' hands, which is okay, but it's just not, that's not what the day is for. So Veterans Day is for honoring the soldiers and the people who serve in the armed forces. And then Memorial Day is for the fallen soldiers that we lost throughout all of our wars, all the wars, not just one war or the other, but it's to memorialize all the fallen soldiers in all the wars. So the history of Veterans Day dates back to the aftermath of World War I. On November 11th, 1918, an armistice, 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 or temporary ceasefire of hostilities, was declared between Allied nations and Germany, effectively ending the fighting on the Western Front. The armistice took effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day at the 11th month. It's actually pretty wild how that happened. I don't know if that was planned out to do it like that, but they were certainly in a crunch for time getting this ceasefire put into place and signed, because there was just so much death and carnage in this war. It is mind-blowing. And the best way I can tell you that would describe it is watching that movie All Quiet on the Western Front. If you have not seen that movie and you're interested at all, whether you're interested or not, I think you should watch the movie. But watch that movie and it'll tell you exactly what World War I was like. It was just nitty, gritty, barbaric, rudimentary, just the real trench warfare. That is actually where trench warfare originated from. I'm talking chlorine gas, mustard gas. I don't know if mustard gas was around then, but I mean, you had millions and millions of people dead from World War I. By far, one of the most deadliest wars in human history. By far. And watching that movie All Quiet on the Western Front, I think it came out in 2022. Just a great movie, man. It won all kinds of awards. And it's unique because they filmed that entire movie with one single camera and one camera guy throughout the entire movie. The entire movie is following this one soldier around everywhere. There's not a whole lot of dialogue. There is some action scenes, but not a whole lot. But just the way that the movie plays out and the screenwriting, and just it's incredibly unique. I've never seen anybody film a movie this way. And it gets the viewer, the audience, so into the character. It's almost like you're in the war with the character. I mean, when an artillery shell goes off, there's like dirt that flies up onto the lens, and it just stays there. Like the camera guy wasn't wiping it off or nothing. They just kept with it. It's nothing like Saving Private Ryan as far as like extreme action, but it's so nitty and gritty and raw. It's just awesome. I definitely highly recommend All Quiet on the Western Front if you want to know what World War I was like. And not just the action parts, but the sadness of it all and the loss of life and the hardships and the emotions and everything, man. Real trench warfare. It's a good movie. So the armistice took effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. A year later, on November 11th, 1919, the first Armistice Day was observed to commemorate the end of World War I. It primarily honored the veterans of that war and was marked with parades, ceremonies, but in 1926, the United States Congress officially recognized Armistice Day. However, after World War II and the Korean War, it became evident that the world had seen additional large-scale military conflicts. In light of this, there was a push to make Armistice Day a day to honor all U.S. veterans, not just those of World War I. And then in 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a bill officially changing Armistice Day to Veterans Day. This shift broadened the scope of the holiday to honor American veterans of all wars. November 11th became a day to recognize and express gratitude for the service and sacrifice of military veterans throughout the nation's history. So like I said, Memorial Day is for the fallen heroes and soldiers of all of our wars, where Veterans Day is for anybody that served in the armed forces alive today. So very different, but I think some people get them confused. I've seen it, which is okay to honor a veteran. I mean, on Memorial Day, that's perfectly fine. It's just, it's not what that day's for. Veterans kind of have their own day, and then you have Memorial Day. So, I mean, it's still good that you honor, it's still good that you praise veterans anytime. It doesn't have to be on Veterans Day. Anytime you see a veteran, buy him a coffee, buy him lunch. They sacrificed, that they made the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, they put their life on the line for me and you, for me to even have this podcast. They went out, they sacrificed their life for all of our freedoms. And so when you do see a veteran, shake their hand, say thank you, buy them a coffee. It's a good thing to do, and you will feel good about yourself. And trust me, they appreciate it as well. So since then, Veterans Day has been observed annually on November 11th with ceremonies, parades, various activities across the United States to honor and thank all of those who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. So before I play this audio, I want to get into how they got this audio. I haven't heard this audio played. I dug deep to find this audio. Somebody had told me that it existed. And man, I'm telling you, it took me about 2 hours to find it because I had to dig into the Smithsonian archives to find this audio. And the way they created the audio is actually pretty incredible. So there was a new exhibit at the Imperial War Museum that uses seismic data collected during the war to recreate the moment the Armistice went into effect. So the soundscape of the Great War must have been devastating. Constant artillery bombardment, rifle shots, fighter planes buzzing overhead, and the screams of soldiers encountering gas. But we don't actually know quite what the World War I sounded like. Magnetic tape didn't exist yet, and recording technology was in its infancy, requiring sound to be mechanically produced using a needle and soft wax or metal. Taking such machines into the field was just not practical. Still, there were people on the front recording. Special units used a technique called sound ranging to try and determine where the enemy gunfire was coming from. So to do so, technicians set up strings of microphones that were actually just barrels of oil dug into the ground, a certain distance apart. Then used a piece of photographic film to visually record noise intensity. The effect is similar to a way a seismometer records an earthquake. So using that data and the time between when a shot was fired and when it hit, they could then triangulate where enemy artillery was located and adjust their own guns accordingly. This to me was wild. Not having a microphone and trying to triangulate where artillery shots were coming from, it's actually ingenious the way they did this. And mind you, you have to remember because in the battlefield, these artillery cannons that they were using, they shot artillery shells for miles. And so the human eye can only see 7 miles from a standstill. So obviously, if you're perched higher above the ground, the further you can see. However, you can only see 7 miles, not because of your sight, but because the curvature of the earth, the horizon. So these guns that were firing, these artillery, were actually beyond the horizon. You couldn't see them. They were shooting from like 20 miles away. So you could not find out where they were shooting from. So you had no idea where these things were coming from. These massive artillery shells would just, you can hear them whistling and they hit the ground and boom, you're done. So they had to triangulate them and find out where they were coming from. And they used this technique back in 1918. They didn't have microphones and radar and satellite imagery. They didn't have any of that stuff. So again, they had to dig holes and use barrels of oil as like a seismometer for how you detect. It's like a rudimentary seismometer. So to detect where they shot the cannon and then where they hit. And then by using mathematics, they can triangulate the distance. It's just wild how they did this during the war. Like, when I say these wars were barbaric, brutal, rudimentary, just raw death and destruction, man. Again, watch that movie and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So back to the article here. So at least one bit of that sound-ranging film survived the war. The film recording the last few minutes of World War I when the guns finally fell silent at the River Moselle on the American front. As Richard Connor at the Dutch Weld reports, part of a new exhibit called Making a New World at London's Imperial War Museum uses those graphic sound waves to recreate the moment the armistice went into effect and the guns fell silent. So as part of a celebration to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the end of the war, the museum commissioned the sound production company called Coda to Coda to use the film strip of the guns firing away at 10:58 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, then going silent when the clock strikes 11, the symbolic moment politicians determined the war would end, to try and recreate what that instant may have sounded like. And I have the audio right here. I'm going to go ahead and play it for you. I want you to kind of just visualize yourself in a trench, in this nasty, wet, muddy trench. You're hungry. You've lost your friends. You know that the war's coming to an end. You just don't know when. And essentially, it is what you're hearing, what you're getting ready to hear is the middle of a full-blown battle. And I want you to visualize and listen to how chaotic and just staggeringly loud it had to have been to be in one of these wars. And then the wildest part, and you'll notice this, is when the clock strikes 11 a.m. on the dot, because you could see it right here on the film. When the clock strikes 11 a.m., you'll hear just dead silence. It is some of the wildest audio I've ever heard in my life. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you so that you guys can visualize yourself in a trench in World War I. Here, check this out. There's 11 a.m. right there. Wow. Just incredible, man. Just the sheer relief, I guess it must have been, because, ladies and gentlemen, that was chaos. There was just straight up bombs, artillery, gunfire, machine guns, non-stop. I guarantee every single one of those soldiers in that war came out of that war deaf. They had to have hearing problems for the rest of their life. Because we're talking 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter cannons going off right by your head. I mean, just the pure chaos and then dead silence at exactly 11 a.m. To the second. They waited to the second, and then they just stopped. And I'm going to try and amplify the audio the best I can. I'm going to tweak it a little bit so that you can really get the full effect and hear it. Because you can actually hear birds chirping when the gunfire stopped. It's just incredible. An amazing piece of history. I'm glad I can find it. I was actually very intrigued, and I was very excited to find this audio. It took me a long time, and I can't even remember who told me it existed. But it's truly incredible that they have this type of audio out there from World War I, and I just wanted to share it with you guys so that you can get an idea of, some of the stuff our soldiers and veterans have went through, not just back in World War I, which was bad enough, but even today. I mean, we have so many veterans out there that are suffering from PTSD, burn pits, cancer. I mean, the the level of sacrifice that a veteran has made for their love for this country is incredible, and that's exactly why they do deserve their own day. And the fallen soldiers deserve their own day, which is Memorial Day. So like I said, if you see a veteran, shake their hand, buy them a cup of coffee, and just remember that so many lives were given for this amazing, awesome, spectacular country that we live in today. And yes, it may seem hard now, it may seem tough, but you have to remember these things always happen in cycles. There's always ups and downs to every nation. And it's unfortunate that we're having to watch a political system in Washington, D.C. kind of turn that cycle on. It's unfortunate that during the Trump administration, we actually had peace throughout the world. There was peace being brokered all throughout the Middle East with the Abraham Accords. I mean, you had countries that were making peace with one another that have been fighting for thousands of years. And it's just incredible how one administration could make such a big impact as far as peace being brokered around the world, and then another guy can come in and just completely destroy all of it. And it's a shame because I believe we are in this cycle of war. You can kind of, and this is something I found intriguing too when I was reading into World War I. I was reading all into this today, folks. It's a good learning experience. I'm gonna post these articles. I have all the research materials that I read today. I'm going to leave in my podcast description so you guys can read them for yourself. They're long articles, but it goes into minute detail about the Armistice Day, about the time during World War I, what countries were involved, what started it. It's a very complex situation as far as what started it. A lot of different nations involved, and it gets complicated. But I'll leave the article in my podcast description so you guys can read it for yourselves. It almost reminds me of what we're watching today. It was kind of like a domino effect, where one country spotted weakness in another country, and then another country's leader was assassinated, which got another country involved, and it was like this domino effect, and it just snowballed, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the next thing you know, it is a full-blown world war. And I can't help but think it's almost like we're heading into another one. It's almost like the same cycle we're watching happen right now, where you have a leader that came in, you have a leader that was installed into this country, and his weakness from the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal was spotted by our enemies. And all these nations' leaders seen the weakness from Joe Biden, and they wanted to take advantage of the situation. Never forget, folks, we are in the situations we're in as far as these conflicts with Ukraine, Russia, now Israel and the Middle East again, because of Joe Biden's weakness, because of the military-industrial complex getting us into these situations. And in fact, it was Dwight D. Eisenhower, I think, that warned the American people about the military-industrial complex. And that was after World War II, because as you're reading into the history of World War I, you start to realize that there never really was an end to World War I, other than that ceasefire, that armistice that they signed. It didn't take long, and they were right back at each other's throats again in World War II, which seen us get involved around 1940. But if you think about it, the World War I ended in 1918, and then World War II started in the 1930s. So if you think about it, it was a war that never really ended. And unfortunately, we got involved into World War II because of Pearl Harbor and other situations as well. We got involved in 1940. We created the atom bomb. We dropped the atom bomb in 1945, essentially ending the war. It was a race. It was a race to see who can create the biggest death machine to scare everybody into surrender. And we did. We dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. We dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, and that was the end of the war. But as you're reading in the World War I, you could see that it never really ended. And the conflicts that we're seeing right now it's almost as if we're watching it play out again, where all these different countries are all starting to go at each other's throats again, and it's just going to be a snowball effect again. And when you're reading history, it's weird because you're reading it all in with, a few articles, when in reality, it was over a 20 or 25-year span when all these different events happened, and it was like the perfect storm of events. So as you're living through that time, you don't really notice it. But it's because everything is spaced out. It's one event after the other. But when you're reading about it, it makes you think like all this stuff happened within like a 2-year, 3-year period. But it really doesn't. There's a lot of different things that have to happen over a long span of time. And I fear that we're in those times right now. And I've been saying this for months. I do think we are in the beginning days of some type of world war. You could see these conflicts getting bigger. You could see the tensions rising. The events are starting to unfold right in front of our eyes. And technically, in order for it to be a world war, you have to have troops in multiple different conflicts in multiple different countries. So 2 or more countries, you have to have soldiers in those countries, and then you would officially be in a world war. We talked about this a few episodes ago. What is a world war, and are we in one? I'm leaning on the side we are in the beginning days of some type of world war. We're in some type of huge conflict on the horizon, and it's such a shame because the American people had the guy in there that was brokering peace around the world, and because of a media that drummed up enough hatred for one man and brainwashed millions of Americans, we lost that guy. And because we lost that guy, the person that they wanted to get across the finish line is now president of the United States. He's a very weak, a very incompetent, old, decrepit fool that has brought a lot of death and destruction onto this world. And it's just a shame that all of this was caused because of a media. Think about that. Media outlets and the military-industrial complex, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all these entities have caused all this death and destruction because they lie to the American people. If they were to just be honest about what Donald Trump was and who he was, if they weren't so pissed off that they lost an election against Hillary Clinton, we wouldn't be in any of this, folks. Any of it. But I digress. We'll talk about that on another episode. I just wanted to pay tribute to the veterans out there. I wanted to play you this audio that I found. It's incredible. And like I said, I'm going to try and amplify it so you can really hear it. If you're listening to it in your car, turn it up and you'll hear the birds chirping in the end. And to me, it just blew my mind because it went from pure chaos and carnage. And then at exactly 11 a.m. when the armistice went into effect, everything stopped. And you want to talk about a relief. I bet these soldiers had never been happier in their life, honestly. To sit there and be in those mud-filled, stanky trenches for years, and then someone comes up to you and says there was an armistice signed and it's going into effect in a few hours. I bet they were so freaking happy when the firing stopped. I can't imagine what the feeling must have been like. And I hope that audio just gave you a little bit of peace of what those brave men went through back in World War I. It's pretty crazy. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you tune into the next episode I'm going to be putting out here in just a little bit. I'm going to try and do a couple episodes for Sunday. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. Trust me, there is no shortage of insane things happening out there. And one thing I want to hint towards is Martha Blackburn has issued a subpoena for, get this, Jeffrey Epstein's flight log. Yeah. This is going to be interesting, and it should be shocking to people, and I'm surprised a lot of people aren't, up in arms about this. How is it that we don't know who is in that black book that they have? They got it, folks. They got a black book with all kinds of names in it. Very rich, wealthy, powerful people. We know they have the book. They know that we know that they have the book, but they're still continuing to hide it. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Marsha Blackburn has just issued a plethora of subpoenas, and she is not messing around. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So make sure you tune into that episode. It's going to be good. There's a couple other things I want to touch base on, but I hope you guys had a good Veterans Day weekend. And to any veterans that are listening to this, thank you. Thank you for making the ultimate sacrifice for this awesome country of ours. I know you love it just as much as I do. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. I appreciate everything you guys do, and I appreciate everything you guys have done. I just hope you guys had a good weekend, and I hope you guys live a peaceful and prosperous life. You certainly deserve it. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I want you guys to have a good day. Have a great Veterans Day weekend. I'll talk to you guys here in a little bit. God bless you, and God bless America. You guys have a good day. Bye-bye.